Why this obsolete American bomber became the RAF's deadliest tactical weapon in the Mediterranean May 1942. The Western Desert, a formation of unescorted Baltimores climbed toward Rommel's advancing columns near Gazala. The mission planners believed the aircraft's speed and defensive armament would protect them. Messerschmitt Bf-109s found them before they reached the target. The formation was shattered. Survivors who made it back reported that unescorted daylight attacks had become suicide missions. The aircraft the Americans had rejected as obsolete had suffered a catastrophic introduction to combat. The RAF had gambled on a bomber that the US Army Air Forces declined to adopt, and within weeks of entering operations, that gamble appeared to have failed. Yet within 6 months, those same Baltimores would help win the Battle of El Alamein. Within 2 years, German and Italian troops would give Baltimore formations a grudging nickname, calling them the 18 Imperturbables, acknowledging their clockwork precision and apparent invulnerability. By war's end, the aircraft America rejected would become the backbone of RAF tactical bombing in the Mediterranean, flying more operational sorties than any other light bomber in the theatre. This is the story of how British tactical doctrine transformed an unwanted American design into one of the most effective weapons of the Desert War, and how the lessons learned by Baltimore crews would shape the air support that made D-Day possible. The Martin Baltimore existed because France was desperate and Britain was pragmatic. In late 1938, the French Air Force was racing to rearm against Germany. They had already ordered the Glenn Martin Company's Model 167, known as the Maryland, a twin-engine light bomber that had lost a US Army competition to the Douglas DB-7. France needed aircraft immediately, and Martin needed orders. The French not only purchased over 200 Marylands, but paid for a major expansion of Martin's factory in Middle River, Maryland. By early 1940, Martin began developing an improved version, the Model 187. In May, the Anglo-French Purchasing Commission ordered 400 before the RAF had even received its first Maryland. When France fell in June, Britain absorbed the entire contract. Martin initially proposed something ambitious, an aircraft powered by Wright R-3350 engines with a calculated top speed of 378 miles per hour. The Americans briefly designated this the XA-23. Then they cancelled it before construction began. The British Air Ministry, drawing on actual combat experience from the Battle of France, specified more conservative requirements. They wanted reliability, not paper performance. They got the Wright R-2600 engine instead. The US Army Air Forces declined to adopt the production aircraft, a decision rooted in doctrine rather than deficiency. At the Air Corps Tactical School at Maxwell Field, Alabama, a group of officers known as the Bomber Mafia had developed a theory of air power that dominated American thinking. They believed that high-altitude daylight precision bombing, using heavy, self-defending bombers like the B-17, could defeat an enemy nation independently, without ground forces. An umpire at 1933 exercises at Wright Field had declared that it was impossible for fighters to intercept bombers, and therefore inconsistent with Air Force employment to develop fighters. This attitude extended to light bombers. If strategic bombing could win wars on its own, why divert resources to tactical aircraft supporting ground troops? The US Army Air Forces already had the A-20 Havoc and B-26 Marauder in their inventory. Adding a British specification aircraft designed for a mission concept they did not prioritise held no appeal. The A-30 designation was simply a Lend-Lease administrative fiction. Under the Act, only armaments in US inventory could be loaned to allies. So Baltimores were formally accepted into American service and immediately transferred to the RAF without flying a single US operational sortie. The Baltimore that reached Egypt looked conventional enough. A twin-engine, mid-wing monoplane with a crew of 4, but it had one distinctive feature that would prove both blessing and curse. The fuselage was extraordinarily narrow, barely 1.1 meters wide, inherited from the Maryland. This gave the aircraft a sleek, almost fish-like profile. It also meant the pilot and navigator bombardier were physically separated from the radio operator and rear gunner by internal structure. Crew members could not move between compartments in flight. 2 Wright GR-2600F5B twin Cyclone engines powered the early marks, each producing 1,600 horsepower. These were 14-cylinder, supercharged, air-cooled radials displacing 42.7 litres, with a dry weight of approximately 928 kilograms each. Later variants received progressively more powerful engines, culminating in the Mark V's R-2600-29s, producing 1,700 horsepower normally and 1,850 at takeoff. That additional power translated directly into better climb rate and ceiling, critical for surviving in airspace contested by Messerschmitts. The defensive armament told the story of lessons learned in blood. The Mark I carried 10 guns, all .303 caliber, with 4 fixed-wing Brownings, 4 fixed rearward-firing fuselage guns of limited utility, and basic ring-mounted dorsal and ventral Vickers K guns. By the Mark III, a Boulton-Paul hydraulic turret housing 4.303 Brownings replaced the dorsal position. These turrets were fitted in Britain rather than at the Martin factory. To avoid production delays, the Mark IIIA introduced the Martin 250CE, electrically powered turret with twin .50 caliber Brownings. The definitive Mark V completed the transition to heavy armament, with .50 caliber guns throughout, 4 in the wings and 2 in the dorsal turret. Each upgrade meant crews stood a better chance against both fighters and ground fire. The bomb bay could carry 2,000 pounds internally, a significant improvement over the 1,000-pound capacity of the Bristol Blenheim it was replacing. Maximum speed reached 302 to 305 miles per hour at 11,500 feet, with a service ceiling of approximately 24,000 feet and a combat range of 950 to just over 1,000 miles. According to contemporary RAF assessments, crews were impressed by the step-up that the Baltimore represented from older aircraft like the Bristol Blenheim. The comparison explains much of the Baltimore's impact. Where the Blenheim managed 266 miles per hour, the Baltimore exceeded 300. Where the Blenheim carried 1,000 pounds of bombs with minimal defensive armament, the Baltimore doubled the bomb load and eventually mounted up to 10 heavy machine guns. Now, before we see how this performed in combat, if you're enjoying this deep dive into a forgotten chapter of RAF history, hit subscribe. It takes a second, costs nothing, and helps the channel grow. Alright, let's get into the combat record. The early losses near Gazala forced a fundamental reassessment. Unescorted missions were permanently discontinued. Low-level attack during the retreat to El Alamein had cost the Baltimore squadrons heavily in losses to ground fire and enemy fighters. Something had to change. What emerged was a tactical system that would revolutionize Allied air support and eventually shape D-Day planning. Under Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder and Air Vice Marshal Arthur Coningham, the RAF developed formation bombing techniques that played directly to the Baltimore's strengths. The Tedder bomb carpet, as it became known, used a 6-aircraft box as the basic unit. 3 boxes flew in V formation, creating an 18-aircraft wave. 2 waves attacked in succession from 10 to 12,000 feet, laying bomb patterns 400 feet wide and 1,200 yards long, as close as 800 yards from friendly lines. One RAF pilot described the effect of these attacks. An area some 400 feet wide and 1,200 yards long was enveloped in a great cloud of dust. A tremendous fire broke out and a black pillar of smoke rose to 1,000 feet. At the Second Battle of El Alamein in October and November 1942, the Desert Air Force fielded 29 squadrons and over 1,500 combat aircraft, more than double Axis strength. The Baltimore formations became a constant presence over Rommel's positions. Imperial War Museum records document a specific mission where 12 Baltimores accompanied by 6 B-25s dropped 100 and 2,250-pound bombs on the 15th Panzer Division near Tel el-Akakir. 2/3 of the attacking aircraft sustained flak damage, yet all returned. The formation discipline held. The Germans and Italians noticed. They called these formations the 18 Imperturbables, a nickname that acknowledged both the clockwork regularity of the attacks and the apparent invulnerability of aircraft that maintained perfect formation despite everything thrown at them. At medium altitude with fighter escort, the Baltimore's 300+ miles per hour speed made interception difficult. One British test pilot noted that the aircraft was extremely good on one engine, maintaining height with the greatest of ease even with a dead engine's propeller unfeathered. Number 223. Squadron RAF served as an early operational training unit for Baltimore's in early 1942, preparing crews for the type's arrival at desert airfields. Number 55 Squadron became the first operational combat unit that May. By 1944, approximately 11 squadrons operated Baltimores simultaneously, including RAF units, Royal Australian Air Force squadrons, and South African Air Force squadrons. The primary operational wing was Number 232 Wing RAF, the Tactical Bomber Force, incorporating 55 and 223 squadrons. Number 21 Squadron South African Air Force converted from Maryland's to Baltimore's in August 1942, becoming operational in October, just in time for El Alamein. The transition was straightforward because the aircraft shared the same basic layout and handling characteristics. Though the Baltimore was heavier and faster, Baltimore squadrons pursued Rommel west through Libya and into Tunisia. The last bombing raid of the North African campaign on May 12, 1943 saw 18 Baltimores of numbers, 223 and 55 squadrons attack enemy troops at Bufiscia. For Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, multiple squadrons relocated to Malta. Number 55 Squadron moved to Sicily in August 1943, then to mainland Italy in September. In Italy, Baltimore supported operations at Salerno, the Sangro River battles, and Anzio. At Anzio, they bombed German supply routes between Avezzano and Popoli on the Rome to Pescara highway. Number 223 Squadron dropped 500-pound medium-capacity bombs on the railway junction at Sulmona. The campaign continued through the Italian peninsula until the German surrender, but the most dramatic chapter of Baltimore operations unfolded over the Aegean Sea. Number 454 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force began flying unarmed long-range photo reconnaissance deep into the Western Aegean from late 1943. In December of that year alone, they reported 75 small ship sightings. The tactical system was elegant in its simplicity. Baltimores would locate enemy shipping and transmit coded sighting reports. RAF bow fighters flying 30 minutes behind would receive the reports and attack the located vessels. This partnership proved devastating. 454 Squadron located the 6,000-ton motor vessel Lavenza in Melos Harbour. Bow fighters sank it the following day. The Baltimores were not just spotting targets, they were shadowing convoys for hours, making repeated low-level passes despite fighter attacks, maintaining contact until strike aircraft could arrive. Number 15 Squadron South African Air Force, nicknamed the Aegean Pirates, developed joint tactics with Number 252 Squadron RAF's rocket-armed bow fighters. The Baltimores provided top cover using their .50 caliber turret guns, while bow fighters attacked shipping below. The cost was severe. 21 crews lost in 10 months of operations against radar-controlled fighters and intense flak across the Aegean Islands. The most notable combined operation was what veterans called the Big Strike of June 1st and 2nd, 1944. A German convoy of 4 merchantmen, 1 destroyer, and 4 armed auxiliaries departed Piraeus for Crete. 8454 Squadron Baltimores shadowed the convoy from first light, making close low-level passes despite repeated fighter attacks. The last shadowing Baltimore was shot down maintaining contact. At 1700 hours, a strike force of 72 Allied aircraft attacked 30 miles north of Heraklion. Marauders, Baltimores forming the bulk of the force, rocket-armed bow fighters, Wellingtons, Mustangs and Spitfires struck together. Squadron leader George Gray of 454. Squadron recalled that they managed to straddle a merchant ship while the South African Baltimores hit another. 3 to 4 merchantmen and a destroyer were ultimately sunk across 2 days of attacks. Air Marshal Park sent personal congratulations, noting that the shadowing Baltimores deserved special mention. Some of the costliest raids against Crete and the Aegean, particularly in mid-1943 and in subsequent 1944 operations, inflicted heavy Baltimore losses. Squadron diaries record single-day casualties that underline how dangerous these shadowing and low-level passes could be. Squadron leader Lionel Folkard described one such mission at under 100 feet. The ground fire was intense. His port engine caught fire. Wounded in the left leg with his right arm hanging by a shred, he crash-landed on a mine-laced beach near Heraklion and survived as a prisoner of war. In the Italian campaign's later stages, Baltimores were modified for night intruder operations. Lone aircraft flew between 6,000 feet and the deck under ground radar control, intercepting German night movements. Aircraft received new bomb sights, illumination flare racks, and turret guns recalibrated for ground strafing. Italian civilians called these night raiders Pipo, a generic nickname applied to various Allied intruder types. Pilot Officer Alf Warner of 454 Squadron described attacking a bridge over the Adige River. "We went in low using guns against the defences on the bridge and skip bombing with 250-pounders, pilot and gunners having a whale of a time." The real measure of the Baltimore's success lies not in the aircraft itself, but in what British forces did with it. The comparison with its predecessor, the Martin Maryland, reveals a seeming paradox. Despite engines producing over 50% more power, the Baltimore was actually slower in cruise, had a much lower ceiling, slower climb, and shorter range than the Maryland. The explanation matters. The Baltimore was approximately 50% heavier. That extra mass went into a deeper fuselage, a 4th crew member, heavier armament, crew armour, self-sealing fuel tanks, and greater structural strength. These were all features demanded by combat experience. The Maryland was fast. The Baltimore was survivable. Against the Douglas Boston A-20, which served alongside Baltimores in the Desert Air Force, the comparison was nuanced. Bostons were slightly faster at low level and had better low-altitude performance. But both types served effectively in similar roles, and the Baltimore carried a comparable bomb load. One aviation forum analysis noted that the Baltimore was sort of in between the A-20 and B-25 as far as weight and wing area. The de Havilland Mosquito was clearly superior in performance and eventually replaced Baltimore's in 2 squadrons later in the war, but the Mosquito arrived in the Mediterranean in small numbers and much later. The Baltimore filled the gap during the critical years of 1942 to 1944, when the Mosquito simply was not available in sufficient quantity for Mediterranean tactical operations. What made the Baltimore effective was not the airframe. It was the tactical system built around it. Lieutenant General Ira C. Eaker of the U.S. Army Air Forces later acknowledged that the Mediterranean theater had been the primary crucible for the development of tactical air power. American commanders were so impressed by British methods at the Salerno landings that they adapted their own doctrine to incorporate them. The Tedder-Conyngham system used joint RAF Army Air Support control staffs at each corps and division headquarters, with forward air support links at brigade level called tentacles. When ground forces needed air support, requests moved through a dedicated communications network to aircraft already airborne in cab rank patterns. Response times dropped from hours to minutes. The Baltimore formations, with their 18 aircraft waves and their 1,200-yard bomb carpets, were the striking arm of this system. Here is the critical irony. The U.S. Army Air Forces declined the Baltimore because it was designed for tactical support of ground forces, a mission they considered secondary to strategic bombing. Then the tactical air system refined through Baltimore operations in North Africa and Italy became the template for Allied tactical air power at D-Day. Tedder was appointed Eisenhower's Deputy Supreme Commander for the Normandy invasion, specifically because of his Mediterranean success. In total, 1,575 Baltimores were built, all at the Glen L. Martin Company factory in Middle River, Maryland. 50 Mark Is, 100 Mark IIs, 250 Mark IIIs, 281 Mark IIIAs, 294 Mark IVs, and 600 Mark Vs. Not a single airframe was built for American use. Everyone was destined for export to Britain and her Commonwealth allies. Some never arrived. 41 Mark IIIs sank when transport ships were torpedoed crossing the Atlantic. Production ended in May 1944. 2 GR-6 maritime reconnaissance prototypes were built, featuring a lengthened fuselage, search radar, and torpedo capability. A planned production run of some 900 airframes was cancelled in April 1944 as other types filled the role. The Baltimore also served with other operators. The Royal Hellenic Air Force flew 79 Baltimores with the 13th Light Bomber Squadron. The Italian co-belligerent Air Force formed the Stormo Baltimore with the 28th and 132nd Groups operating 49 aircraft. Turkey's 1st Bomber Regiment received approximately 70 Baltimores, which served until 1950. Today, not a single complete Baltimore survives. The Glen L. Martin Maryland Aviation Museum has confirmed that of 1,575 built, none are preserved. According to HistoryNet, the last known intact example was used by the US Navy for supersonic airfoil tests, reaching Mach 0.74 in dives. It was later donated to the Baltimore public school system and eventually scrapped. Only underwater wrecks remain. A 454 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force Baltimore was discovered off Antikythera at 61 metres depth in 2025. 5 factors explain why an aircraft that was so effective has become so forgotten. No American combat service means it has no constituency in the nation that dominates World War II aviation historiography. Mediterranean-only operations kept it from the European and Pacific theatres that command the lion's share of popular attention. 0 surviving airframes means no museum centrepiece to anchor public memory. No single dramatic narrative, no Memphis Belle, no Dam Busters captured public imagination. And even the modelling hobby industry has ignored it. As one frustrated model maker noted, with 1,575 examples built, it is somehow interesting that no mainstream Baltimore kit of any scale exists whatsoever. Yet the Baltimore's legacy endures in ways that matter more than museum displays. The 18 Imperturbables proved that formation discipline at medium altitude with proper fighter escort could make light bombers effective in the face of enemy opposition. The Tedder bomb carpet demonstrated that tactical air power could provide close support to ground forces with precision measured in hundreds of yards. The Aegean shadowing missions showed that reconnaissance and strike aircraft, working in coordinated teams, could dominate sea lanes without aircraft carriers. Winston Churchill personally congratulated Baltimore and Beaufighter units on February 22, 1944 for their Aegean work. The Prime Minister understood what the aircraft's American designers never anticipated. The Baltimore was not merely a weapons delivery platform. It was a component in a tactical system that changed how air forces supported armies. The US Army Air Forces had declined the Baltimore because it was designed for tactical support of ground forces, a mission they considered secondary to strategic bombing. They were not wrong about strategic bombing's importance, but they were wrong to dismiss tactical air power as secondary. When American forces landed at Normandy, the tactical air support that protected them and pounded German positions ahead of them drew directly from lessons learned in the Mediterranean. When fighter bombers struck German armour at Falaise, they were executing techniques refined over the Western Desert. The doctrine that made this possible had been developed, tested and proven by Baltimore crews flying from Egyptian airfields, Maltese runways and Italian strips. 1,575 aircraft, everyone built in America, everyone declined by America, everyone flown by the RAF and Commonwealth Air Forces to victory in the Mediterranean. The Baltimore never achieved fame. It achieved something more important. It worked.